The flashing lights were gone. The screaming fans nowhere to be found. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle touched down in Australia this week, it was supposed to be a moment of absolute triumph, a grand homecoming to the very place where their royal journey truly exploded back in 2018. But as they stepped off that plane in 2026, the atmosphere wasn't electric. It was eerie. There were no crowds lined up at the gates, no chaos, no frantic paparazzi chasing their convoy through the streets of Melbourne. Instead, they slipped into the country almost too quietly, like they were trying to avoid the very spotlight they once mastered. They skipped the traditional photo ops and rolled out in a quiet convoy, leaving the press and the public wondering if the Sussex magic had finally run out. It was a controlled, low-key entrance that felt less like a royal arrival and more like a corporate retreat. But that was only the beginning of a trip that would soon set the entire country on fire with a brand new kind of controversy. To understand why this feels so different, you have to remember what happened 8 years ago. In 2018, Harry and Meghan were the ultimate power couple. They were newly married, glowing with the promise of a modern monarchy, and Australia was absolutely obsessed with them. The streets were packed, 10 people deep. The energy was wild, intense, almost primal. They weren't just popular, they were untouchable symbols of a new era. But the 2026 version of this tour feels like a ghost of that past. This time, they didn't arrive on a private jet or a government plane. They flew commercial, sitting in business class on a regular flight from Los Angeles. On the surface, it looks like a humble, relatable move, a way to signal they are one of us. But in the world of high-stakes public relations, nothing is ever that simple. Every choice is a signal, and the signal they're sending now is one of independence, even if that independence comes with a heavy price. But even with the humble arrival, something felt off from the very first minute. The buzz that usually follows them across the globe seemed to have been replaced by a polite, cautious curiosity. The electric air was gone. It was replaced by a question that seemed to follow them from the airport to their very first stop. Who exactly are they now? They aren't working royals yet. They are performing the same duties. They aren't just celebrities, yet they are selling tickets to their presence. This quasi-royal status is the tightrope they've chosen to walk. But as they were about to find out, walking a tightrope in front of a skeptical public is the hardest job in the world. And the first sign that things had shifted wasn't found in a headline. It was found in the silence of a hospital hallway. But that silence was about to get much louder. As they walked into the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne for their first official stop, all eyes were on them, searching for that old spark that used to light up a room. But what happened next was the kind of moment that publicists lose sleep over. Instead of the roar of a crowd or a burst of excited applause, there was a strange, heavy stillness. When they entered the room, the reaction wasn't a wave of energy, it was a soft, hesitant hi from a few onlookers. It was subtle, but it hit like a ton of bricks. In that exact moment, the shift in public perception became undeniable. This wasn't 2018 anymore. Back then, they were the untouchable future. Today, they are public figures trying to find their place in a world that has moved on faster than they expected. Inside the hospital, Harry and Meghan did what they do best: they connected. Harry moved naturally through the room, crouching down to meet children at eye level, asking about their care and their lives. It was the version of him that people still remember from the royal system, someone who truly knows how to make a vulnerable person feel seen. And Meghan was right beside him, leaning into the emotion of the moment, hugging patients and offering soft words of encouragement to families who are going through their darkest days. For the people inside that room, the moments were real. A young patient handed Harry a bouquet, and Meghan told a little girl to keep being brave. These are the scenes that have always defined their public image, the moments that feel genuine and hard to question. But once you step outside those hospital walls, the story changes completely. While they were connecting with patients, a completely different conversation was building across Australia. Critics and commentators were already picking apart the why behind the visit. If they aren't working royals, why does this trip look exactly like a royal tour? Why the formal hospital visits? Why the staged photos? The quiet hi from the crowd wasn't just a lack of volume. It was a signal of uncertainty. The public isn't sure how to treat them anymore. Are they guests of the state? Are they private citizens on a business trip? Or are they something else entirely, a brand that uses the imagery of the monarchy to maintain global relevance? This ambiguity is exactly where the tension lives. And that tension only grew when the world saw what Meghan was wearing during her next stop. Because while the couple is trying to project an image of service and empathy, the reality of their lifestyle keeps getting in the way. It's a constant battle between the Duchess and the woman next door, and in Australia, that battle was about to take a very controversial turn. You see, it's one thing to hug a child in a hospital, but it's another thing entirely to walk into a homeless shelter while wearing an outfit that costs more than most people's monthly rent. And that was just the first of many contradictions that were about to be exposed. The optics only got more intense when Meghan headed to Markle Community Services for Women in Melbourne. This is a place that supports people facing domestic violence and homelessness, real raw human struggles. To the casual observer, the scene was powerful and exactly what you'd expect from a humanitarian. Meghan put on an apron, stepped into a kitchen, and started helping prepare and serve lunch for the women there. She was smiling, moving with ease, and looking like she belonged in that space of community service. She even made a surprise appearance on MasterChef Australia, adding a layer of celebrity glamour to the day. It was the kind of imagery that is designed to cement a reputation as a person of the people. But the internet in 2026 is a very different place than it was a decade ago. Within hours of the photos going live, the Sussex sleuths had already broken down Meghan's outfit. While she was serving soup and talking about the importance of supporting the vulnerable, she was wearing a designer ensemble valued at well over $1,000. For many, that detail didn't just go unnoticed. It became the entire story. The contrast between a high-end luxury wardrobe and the setting of a homeless shelter created a visual disconnect that sparked a massive relatability debate. Critics argued that the outfit reinforced an image of exclusivity and branding rather than genuine connection. Was she there to serve? Or was she there for a photo op that would look good in a future Netflix documentary? This debate over authenticity is the shadow that follows Meghan everywhere she goes. In one breath, she is presenting herself as a grounded mother and entrepreneur, and in the next, she is being marketed as one of the world's most influential women by Time and Vogue. In Australia, that duality felt particularly sharp. It's the quasi-royal problem in a nutshell. You want the prestige of the title, but you also want the freedom of a celebrity brand. But when you mix the two in a space meant for charity, it can often come off as tone-deaf. The MasterChef appearance only added to this feeling of a curated life. It was fun, it was light, but it felt like a commercial for brand Meghan, rather than a meaningful contribution to the cause at hand. And this was only the preview for what was coming next in Sydney. Because while the Melbourne stops were about service, the Sydney portion of the trip was leaning fully into the monetization side of the Sussex brand. The questions about whether this was a tour of duty or a tour of profit were about to reach a breaking point. Because if you thought a $1,000 outfit at a shelter was controversial, wait until you see the price tag for proximity to the Duchess at a luxury beachfront hotel. But before we get to the wellness retreat, we have to talk about Harry and the new way he's trying to sell his truth. While Meghan was navigating the kitchens of Melbourne, Prince Harry was preparing for a very different kind of stage. He traveled to Melbourne Park to deliver the keynote speech at the InterEdge Psychosocial Safety Summit. This wasn't your typical charity speech. This was a high-level corporate event focused on leadership and mental health in the workplace. Harry has spent years positioning himself as a global advocate for mental fitness. And this summit was his chance to prove he belongs in the room with top business leaders and policymakers. He walked onto the stage in a simple jacket and white shirt, looking every bit the professional speaker. During his 15-minute keynote, Harry made a bold move. He called for mental illness to be reclassified as mental injury. It's a powerful reframing, one that suggests these struggles aren't permanent flaws, but injuries that can be healed with the right support and culture. He spoke about his own life, admitting that there were times he felt lost, betrayed, or completely powerless. He even went back to the moment that defined him, the death of his mother just before his 13th birthday. He told the crowd that for years, he didn't want the job or the role that came with his birthright. He wanted out of the goldfish bowl. It was raw, it was personal, and for many in the audience, it was a moving display of vulnerability. But here's where the high-retention, shocking truth comes in. This summit wasn't a public service event. It was a commercial summit with tiered pricing. Tickets for the event ranged from hundreds to over $2,000. If you wanted to sit in the same room as the Duke, you had to pay a premium. This has led to a growing wave of criticism that Harry is monetizing his personal trauma. By sharing his most painful memories at a ticketed event, he's essentially turning his life story into a product. Critics are asking, if mental health is a human right, why does it cost thousands of dollars to hear a prince talk about it? This pay-to-play model of advocacy is creating a massive rift in his public image. The duality was visible even in the room. Meghan sat in the front row watching her husband speak, projecting an image of a supportive wife. But as the cameras flashed, it was hard to ignore that the entire scene was being managed by private organizers and corporate sponsors. This wasn't a Royal Foundation event. This was a business transaction. And this commercialization of their personal narratives is exactly what is driving the quasi-royal debate. They are using the gravity of their royal history to sell tickets to corporate summits. It's a brilliant business move, but is it sustainable? Or will the public eventually grow tired of paying for a story they've already heard? That question was about to get a very expensive answer in Sydney. If the Melbourne summit raised eyebrows, the Her Best Life retreat in Sydney blew the roof off the controversy. This was Meghan's headline event, a 3-day luxury wellness weekend at the Intercontinental Sydney Coogee Beach. This wasn't a charity walk or a hospital visit. This was a girls' weekend like no other, designed for approximately 300 women who were willing to pay for the ultimate Sussex experience. The ticket prices were staggering. A standard experience started at $2,699, while the VIP package climbed to $3,199. For that price, guests got yoga sound healing manifestation sessions and the big draw, an in-person conversation with the Duchess herself. But there was a catch, and it was a big one. According to leaked itineraries, the organizers implemented a total ban on mobile phones and recording devices during Meghan's session. The official reason was to ensure guests were fully present, but the move also ensured that the Duchess had total control over her image. In an age of instant social media, a blackout at a wellness retreat feels like a move from an old-school Hollywood playbook. It creates an aura of exclusivity and mystery, making those who paid feel like they are part of a secret club. But for the public looking in, it feels like another barrier, another way to commodify proximity to royalty. The VIP guests didn't just get a speech, they got a group table photo with Meghan and a VIP goodie bag. This is where the line between Duchess and influencer completely disappears. In the royal world, you don't pay for a photo with a member of the family. It's a matter of public service. In the Sussex world, that photo is a Tier 1 perk. The retreat also featured Dr. Justine Corey, a renowned therapist and focused on connection and growth. But it's hard to talk about connection when the entry fee is more than what most people earn in a month. It raises a glaring question about who this best life is actually for. Is it for all women? Or just the ones who can afford a $3,000 ticket? This shift into the luxury wellness space is a major part of Meghan's new brand as ever, which focuses on hospitality and lifestyle. By headlining this retreat, she is signaling that she is moving away from the traditional humanitarian lane and into the lifestyle mogul lane occupied by people like Gwyneth Paltrow. But Paltrow doesn't have a royal title. Meghan does, and using that title to sell luxury weekends is what has the critics and potentially the palace so riled up. It feels like a rebranding of the monarchy into a high-end subscription service. And as the retreat guests were sipping their green juices in Sydney, the rest of Australia was starting to count the cost. Before they could wrap up the trip, there was one more stop that carried a heavy weight of history: Bondi Beach. This location is iconic for the Sussexes because it was the site of one of their most famous 2018 moments, where they sat in an anti-bad vibes circle with surfers. But in 2026, the visit had a much more somber tone. Bondi had recently been the site of a tragic terrorist attack, and Harry and Meghan were there to meet with survivors and first responders at the Surf Bathers Life-Saving Club. It was a chance to show the serious side of their work, honoring those who had lived through a nightmare. But even at the beach, the security bubble was impossible to ignore. In 2018, they walked through the crowds, shaking hands and taking selfies. In 2026, the area was locked down. The security presence was massive, with reports of local police and private teams creating a ring of steel around the couple. This shift from accessible to fortified is the visual representation of their new life. They want to be part of the community, but they are increasingly separated from it by the very real and very expensive need for protection. It's a paradox. The more they try to connect, the more their security requirements remind everyone of how different they are. Watching them at Bondi, you could see the 2018 glow had been replaced by a 2026 focus. They are older, they are parents, and they have been through years of public warfare. They are no longer the wide-eyed newcomers. They are battle-hardened public figures. But as they stood with the survivors, the conversation wasn't just about the tragedy. It was about who was paying for that ring of steel on the sand. Because while the couple says this trip is privately funded, the sight of dozens of Australian police officers on duty at Bondi told a different story to the local taxpayers. This is the central conflict of the entire tour. You can have the most meaningful conversation with a survivor, but if the public feels like they are being forced to pay for your private visit, the message gets lost in the math. And the math in Australia right now is looking very ugly for the Sussexes. A national cost of living crisis has made people hypersensitive to public spending, and what used to be seen as a royal perk is now being viewed as a taxpayer burden. And that frustration was about to find a very organized outlet. While Harry and Meghan were moving from hospitals to retreats, a digital uprising was taking place on change.org. A petition had been launched with a very simple and direct demand: no taxpayer money for the Sussex visit. By the time they reached the midpoint of their tour, the petition had exploded, gathering over 45,000 signatures. This isn't just a few internet trolls making noise. This is a significant portion of the Australian public expressing organized frustration. The petition cited the massive pressure Australians are facing, rising grocery bills, record-high fuel prices, and mortgage stress, and argued that public resources must be used responsibly and applied fairly. The backlash is centered on the security loophole. Harry and Meghan are technically in Australia on a private business trip, not an official state visit. However, because of their high profile and their titles, the host country still feels an obligation to provide some level of public safety and police support. For many Australians, this feels like the couple is having their cake and eating it too. They want the freedom to take paid speaking gigs and sell wellness retreats, but they still want the government to provide the security that usually comes with being a working royal. It's a financial gray area that has turned into a PR disaster. The government has tried to remain neutral, but the pressure is mounting. People are asking for a clear confirmation that no official resources were allocated to this visit. The fact that this is happening in 2026, a year where economic anxiety is at an all-time high, makes the timing particularly damaging. In 2018, no one cared about the cost because the show was so good. In 2026, the show feels more like a business, and nobody likes paying for someone else's business expenses. This financial firestorm is the biggest threat to their brand because it attacks their core claim that they are independent and standing on their own 2 feet. If they are truly independent, the argument goes, they should be paying for every single police officer and every single road closure out of their own pockets. But the Sussexes find themselves in a trap. They are too famous to go without security, but too controversial to have the public pay for it. This deadlock is what turned the quasi-royal tour into a quasi-royal humiliation for some. And as the signatures on that petition keep climbing, the message to the couple is clear. The Australian fair go doesn't extend to paying for a Duke's private marketing tour.